are, as a collective cultural group, idolizing this idea that failure is not something that we can do because it's something that we heard in a film, but we have sort of created this vision in our minds that it was about a heroic, Herculean effort by a group of folks who wanted to go into space. So this, needless to say, is quite problematic. But as a young woman who had been taught that she could do anything by a really tough mom, I took these words to heart and I thought, yes, exactly. Failure is not an option, right? I might even have owned this t-shirt when I was younger, possibly. So after graduating from university, I got a job in the startup scene in Silicon Valley, working at a semiconductor startup, which was really cool. I learned all about traffic management and networking and other good stuff. And I thought, I'm going to go out and change the world. I'm going to go out and do great things, and I'm going to work very, very hard, and failure is not an option. And I thought this so strongly that I actually printed up a little poster for my cubicle that said, failure is not an option. And I was quite proud of it. And I would, gaze upon it, every day when I came into work thinking, today will be the day that I achieve monumentally wonderful things and it will be great and I will always succeed in my quest. Well, needless to say, I was young and foolish then. I'm older and foolish now. And I have learned that the embracing of failure is a positive thing to do because I do it every day, usually 3 or 4 times before I even get out of bed. So when we're thinking about failure, failure is terrifying, right? There are so many negative consequences to failing that can occur to us immediately. We may lose our jobs, our businesses may lose money, customers, our businesses may shutter. We may make design decisions that are very foolish and get us mocked in the press. Cough, Apple headphones, cough, cough. Oh, come on, that was funny. So when thinking about failure, and thinking about failure sort of at an enterprise organizational level, we need to absolutely 100% embrace and absorb the idea that failure is simply inevitable. Jim Whitehurst, the CEO of Red Hat, has a book that he's written called The Open Organization, which is about the way that Red Hat sort of self-organizes the company into ways that allow ideas to bubble up from the bottom rather than sort of top-down hierarchical decision-making. And this is one of my favorite quotes from his book. Won't most of these projects that are bubbled up from the staff, won't most of them fail? And his response is, the simple answer is yes. Most of them will fail. And yet, in his experience, he has not seen that there is any difference in the amount of success or failure because of top-down decision-making or bottom-up pushing for different projects to take place. Failure is inevitable, it will simply happen, but the best ideas he has found come from crowdsourcing and letting everyone express their ideas and opinions, push on each other's ideas, and mold them into something that's inevitably going to potentially have greater levels of success. So, if failure is not optional, if failure is actually a requirement, then you would think everybody would have gotten on the embracing the failure train already, right? Like we would all be very excited and very happy to fail. And interestingly enough, that's not what we do, right? That's not what we're neurally geared for as human beings, right? Once upon a time, failure to notice that that slithery, pointy thing was actually a snake meant that you probably wouldn't live very long, right? So evolutionarily, we're geared toward avoiding failure. So this is an entire process of relearning and reconsidering what we're doing. Consider Thomas Edison on failure. He said, I have not failed if 99 out of 100 experiments don't work. I have not failed. I've just found 99 ways that won't work. Now, consider, too, the power of that statement. Here is someone whose name is synonymous with innovation and with the creation of new useful things, right? Thomas Edison. And yet, even he wasn't comfortable with the concept of failing. I have not failed. I have found 99 ways that won't work. So if someone who is as accomplished as this person is was having difficulty embracing failure, then at least we can all understand why we may be in the same boat. So if we know all this, why is it still so hard? All right, so let's ask some honest questions of ourselves. How many of you work in companies where you're told that you should experiment and try new things, and it's okay if you make mistakes? Oh, it's awesome. Okay, great. I see a lot of hands in the audience. So of those of you who raised your hands, how many of you tried something cool, new, and exciting, and then got a bad performance review? I see some hands going up. How many of you perhaps lost your job because you tried something new and exciting and crazy and bold? Okay, I'll say that that was me. It was a wonderful learning experience, and I have much to share about it over beers. So again, we are in a position where we can say all we want that failure is inevitable. We can know this to be true, but it is still very difficult to actually act on that notion, right? So instead of simply standing up here and exhorting you to say like, hey, it's cool to fail, no worries, you'll learn how to do it just like I did, that's ridiculous. It is a very difficult process. So let's talk about, again, some of the ways where we set ourselves up for not being able to embrace failure, and then a couple of tips for how to make it easier for your team or organization. So anti-pattern number one, this is in fact my favorite failure anti-pattern ever. Micromanagement and avoidance of failure. I have coined an acronym for it. It is MAF. MAF is the mind killer, the little death that brings total oblivion. So how many folks in the audience are managers? Okay, quite a few hands going up, cool. How many of you would describe yourself as leaders, either in title or just in behavior? Excellent. So how many of you have found that you really deeply want your team to be successful, so when you find that they're veering off in the wrong direction, you stop them immediately? This was my trouble when I was first time I managed people. It was awful. I never wanted anyone to screw things up because I didn't want them to feel bad, so I was always making sure that they understood when they were making a mistake and tried to guide them in the right direction. So this is a noble thought, right? It's a noble goal to want people to be successful and to try and help them not screw up, right? Well, the problem with this, of course, is that once you have people in a position where they're not actually able to be creative or to do what they'd like to do because they're simply waiting for a correction, what happens? They stop doing anything. No one is actually going to attempt to be creative if they think that the next thing that's going to happen to them is they're going to be told what to do. Especially when you have a message, you can do whatever you'd like to do, be creative, find new solutions to the problem. But the behavior that they're experiencing from their leadership is a constant contradiction to that, right? You can go ahead and fail, except I won't let you fail. And that the impact of that behavior not only stifles people from wanting to do anything, because they think they'll constantly simply be redirected or eventually told what to do. It also stifles their creativity because they don't think it's okay to fail. If you tell people that it's okay to fail, but then you won't let them, the real message they're getting is, we'll tell you that failure is okay, but it's not actually okay to fail, so you should just sit on your hands and wait to be told what to do. Don't come up with your own ideas. Don't get creative, because failure is bad, and I'm going to stop you from failing, no matter how hard it is that you're trying to do something that's exciting and new. So, micromanagement and avoidance of failure is death. If you are a leader or a team manager, I cannot encourage you enough to just let your employees make mistakes. And I suggest that you let them make the small mistakes. Like, don't let them set the building on fire. That's not going to help anyone. But the smaller mistakes, right, the ones that are going to lead to learning experiences, even when you know that it's just not going to work, let them go ahead and fail. It's going to be fine. This is how we learn, and this is how we create an environment where we can encourage people to understand that it is safe for them to be creative and to innovate, because after that mistake, after that failure, nothing bad happens, right? They've learned something. They can contribute to the global knowledge pool of what is not actually going to be successful. And they feel empowered the next time that they have a good, crazy idea to go ahead and pursue it. So on the individual level, this is one of the greatest ways that we cause a lack of innovation and failure in ourselves. And I think that this is because we've largely been taught and conditioned, potentially by micromanagers who would like us to avoid failure, that you should always make sure that whatever goals or objectives you set for yourself are something that you can achieve. How many of you have to set key performance indicators or goals as part of your job? Wow, not a lot of hands. Maybe this is a US California thing. What do you have to, just anyone at random, and you don't have to use the little boxy thing. I can tell you don't want to give it back, I understand. What do you do to be measured for performance at your job? Do you just show up every day and is it number of tickets you close? How do people know you're doing a good job? Don't ask these questions. Excellent, I have discovered something that should not be explored. Excellent, all right. So let's say once upon a time that you were working in an environment where you were expected to set goals as part of your work requirements. You can even think about this in terms of your personal life, right? What are your personal goals? I want to read 30 books this year. I want to run a marathon. Clearly that one's not happening. And I want to, visit Machu Picchu because it looks very, very cool. So we hold ourselves back when we go through this process of goal setting and deciding who we want to be next and what we want to achieve if we're only deciding that those goals are something we can already do. So I know when I have managed people, I've always encouraged them to set stretch goals for themselves. So what is something that you think you would love to be able to do that you absolutely 100% know that you can't do? Set that as a goal for yourself. And it's great if you get to 75%, maybe even 50%. If it's something extremely difficult that you didn't think that you could do, the journey towards that goal is just as valuable and important, right? If you don't set the goal at all, you're not even going to achieve that, maybe 25, 50, 75%, even part of it. That learning will never take place because you're not challenging yourself. And putting ourselves into environments where we're not challenged it's a way to stagnate, right? It's a way to not continue our learning and personal and professional growth. So when you're setting goals and objectives for yourself or for your team, again, keep in mind, setting goals that are only what you think you can achieve is not actually helping anybody to innovate. Think a little bit further, a little bit harder, and again, accept that you won't get to that final goal, but it's the process of getting towards it that is helping your team to be more successful, that's helping you as an individual to be more successful. The anti-pattern of them all, the company meeting. How many people have ever actually enjoyed a company meeting? How much beer was involved? Yes. So I have found the company all-hands meeting to usually be the greatest anti-pattern in the history of the universe because they inevitably turn into these horrible rah-rah sessions where there is no actual analysis of success or failure. There is simply just, everything is great. Everything is going just great. Everything is great. Well, everything is not great, right? There's always something that can be improved upon. And sending the message to your organization that everything is great, even when there are issues, because there will always be issues, again, failure is inevitable, sends the message that it's not okay to fail. And if you create an environment where everyone assumes that they have to only be sharing positive news, where they only should have good things to say, what are you teaching them? Don't try anything new. Don't do anything hard. Only embrace the status quo because all we want to talk about are the good times. Or some folks will actually address problems within the organization, but they'll address them very quickly, kind of offhandedly, so yes, it's quite terrible that our sales are down 50%, and it's very sad that we're losing key personnel, but that's okay because everything's gonna be great next week. No worries, everything's gonna be fine, don't worry about it. So there's a huge issue with this, which is we hire smart people, right, at our companies. No one wants to work with people who are not super smart and awesome like them. Do you think they believe you when you're standing up there saying, yeah, everything's terrible, but it's gonna be great? No, of course they don't. And then you're introducing a climate and an environment of lack of trust because you are being disingenuous in your communications with your team, right? With your organization. Like they realize that what you're saying is not something that they can really believe in. And once you have a lack of belief in your common goals and your common values as a team, you're not going to go anywhere. At that point, people become very centered on their individual needs, their individual processes. We get back into siloing. There's a lack of cross-communication. And again, the failure that results from saying that failure is okay, but just glossing over it instead of trying to analyze the root cause is a larger failure than the one that was being glossed over in the first place. So let's talk about some ways to fail the right way. A couple of ways to do it better. So anti-patterns are great, but actual tips for success. So celebrate what you learned by failing. So again, failure carries with it this deep stigma. No one wants to be the person who broke the build. No one wants to be the person who kept their colleagues working all weekend because the rollout on Friday night, which was such a good idea, didn't go well, because like it ever has on a Friday. Actually, take the time to talk about what you've learned as a process through this process of failure. So one of my favorite examples of this is actually the engineering team at Etsy. So they have apparently an internal, I believe it's Slack channel, where if you make a mistake, part of your job is to go into this internal channel and say, yay, I completely screwed up this thing. And that's what you're supposed to do. After the fire has been put out, your first task is to go into this channel where everyone in the company, from the CEO down to the receptionist, is hanging out and say, well, I completely screwed up and here's what I did. Wow, this was fantastic. I made a colossal mistake. So now I like this because it's definitely, it certainly addresses the problem head on, right? Like the expectation is when you screw up really badly, you're gonna go talk to everybody about it. And you clearly get past your intimidation about sharing failure pretty quickly if it's expected that you will do so. And the great thing is part of the company culture is that as soon as someone comes into the channel and makes this statement, the response from everyone inside is to say, congratulations, yay, you rock. You totally screwed that up. That is great. What did you learn? Right? So no one shames you. No one says, secretly to the person in the cubicle next to them, wow, we should really fire that Dave guy. Wow. Right? People are excited that you have learned something. You take the stigma of failure away and replace it with a love of learning and an environment of safety. This is a place in which people want to learn and grow, and they are not afraid to try new things and to challenge themselves because they know that, one, it's expected that they're going to screw up and that their teammates are going to be there to support them when they do so. So for folks who aren't working in largely distributed teams, the fail cake is awesome. How many folks have heard of the fail cake? I see a couple hands. Oh, I'm so excited to introduce you to this. Has anyone here eaten the fail cake? Oh, this is so great. Okay, so the fail cake is an awesome tool for what I like to call the after action, right? I hate calling root cause failure analysis processes postmortems because nobody died. So let's say a colossal mistake has happened and things have gone badly and people were kept up late at night and didn't get to see their families over the weekend and people are just maybe a little bit grumpy. So the idea of the fail cake is whoever was most to blame for the mistake brings to the meeting where everyone is going to sit around and talk about what went wrong, a cake. And before you get into the discussion of what went wrong and whose fault it was and why I didn't have enough budget for hardware and why that person over there should have come into work on time and all of the other things that are finger pointy and blame placey, people get cake. Now, this is an incredibly effective tool for a number of reasons. One, it taps into our very human processes about forging connection, right? And mutual compassion and care that comes when we break bread together, right? How many people have ever uttered the phrase, I'll have a beer with this person, but I don't want to have dinner with them? Yep, couple hands, right? Actually sitting down and having a meal is so deeply tied into our sense of care and compassion and connection that this just goes straight to the heart of that by sharing a meal together, right? There has been an issue, something has gone wrong, trust has been broken, but we are going to reestablish that connection and that trust and that compassion through the breaking of bread together. So that's super cool. 2, let's just be honest. It's really hard to get pissed off at someone when you're eating cake, right? It's filled with sugar, it's delicious, maybe it's shaped like a cute little Totoro. So, if you have to have these discussions, you're softening the blow by doing it over something delicious. And you're also giving the person who potentially caused the issue the opportunity to make up for it, right? I know that I caused you problems. I know that I made things difficult for us, but I'm giving you a gift. And with this gift, I'm expressing that I am sorry that I caused you these problems, but you're not actually asking someone to stand there in front of a room full of people and flagellate themselves and say, I'm sorry, I am a terrible person. Instead, they can simply make an offering of delicious icing and sugar, and everyone can bond over that and discuss what went wrong and what can be done better the next time. So this is something that is not really a goal for individuals. This is more at the organizational level and something that I would love for managers to take back to their companies and suggest as a part of their company processes. So making failure and what you learn from it an integral part of the performance review process. So earlier during this talk, I asked how many folks had worked in companies where they were told it was okay to fail, and many hands went up. And a good number of hands went up when I said, how many of you were punished when you failed, right? So this is critical because I don't know anyone, honestly, who can tell me that they were not at one point or another in a job where they were encouraged to be creative and think outside the box, and as soon as they did that, they were punished in some way, right? They were mocked by coworkers when they made a mistake, they didn't get a raise, they were fired, they soon discovered that they were not a culture fit, etc., right? So instead of simply saying that we value failure, we value innovation, we value creativity, make it a part of the human resources process that failure is expected. So once upon a time, I was working at Google Incorporated, and one of the ways in which they enacted this structure was the idea that when you wanted to move to the next level in your career, so if you were at level software engineer 1 and you wanted to be a software engineer 2, the expectation was that you would be doing all of the duties of a software engineer at level 2 and some of the duties of a software engineer at level 3. And once you were at that part of the job ladder in terms of your duties and responsibilities, then it was the time for you to be promoted to the level above. So software engineer 1 to software engineer 2. And then it was expected. It was absolutely 100% expected to the point where it was like written down in manuals for the management that your next performance review, you were going to get a does not meet expectations. And you were going to get that because when you moved to the next level and you were fulfilling all the duties of a software engineer at level 2, then they were hoping that you were starting to reach up to work at level 3 and 4. And you weren't ready to do all those things necessarily. You were just learning. This was new for you. And because it was new for you, you were going to not succeed. You were going to make mistakes. But your job was also protected during that phase because it was absolutely 100% understood that you were going to screw it up. And that was how, again, there was the creation of a safe environment for people to fail. Recently, Google did a whole ton of research on what makes teams particularly successful. Was it managers? Was it the project they were working on? What was the key value? And at least unsurprisingly to me, their research came back with creating an environment with a sense of intellectual safety, an environment in which people feel like it is okay to fail and make mistakes and learn from them with their peers involved is what creates the most successful team. So again, codify this as part of your company's processes. Don't just say it's okay to fail, write it down. Make it part of your company mission statement or values, make it part of your HR process. Make sure that it is codified. Really quick on the root cause failure analysis. I don't like the usual, like, let's sit down and blame each other. I do think the 5 whys is a really great way to do after action reports or failure analysis. But I really appreciate this one that my friend Amy Shkavarda, who is a DevOps project manager, taught me at one point. I like, I wish, I wonder. So instead of asking ourselves the typical questions, we ask people to complete these sentences. I liked that we all worked really, really hard to solve this problem quickly. I wish we had known that this code had not been tested before it went into production. I wonder what would have happened if we had realized that our test suite was broken. I wonder what the result would have been if we had been, if our product would have been even better before. These are useful questions, I think, because they encourage a generative, expansive, creative thinking. And again, it's very hard to be a jerk when you're using these questions, right? If somebody says, I wish you weren't such an idiot, you have a bigger problem at that point, probably, than just your postmortem. So I encourage folks to use these questions. So I think that one of the reasons why we have so much trouble is because it is almost impossible to measure the impact of failing to fail. It is very easy to measure the impact of failure, right? Lost customers, lost revenue, jobs lost, et cetera. And we now exist in a universe where the mantra is, if it cannot be measured, it is unimportant. And yet, there is no effective measurement for a lack of innovation. The only measurement we have of that is when we suddenly are told that companies are stagnating, their shareholders are losing interest, they are not creating innovative products anymore, and usually by that time it's too late. So again, assume that you're going to have to spend time, human resources, and capital in pursuit of failure, and it will be impossible for you to measure the impact of not failing, and that's just going to have to be okay. It requires a leap of faith. So last but not least, and this is very much on a personal level, and part of the reason why I told you the wonderful story of the Apollo 13 mission in the beginning, you have to own your mistakes, right? If you're really going to embrace failure, you have to be willing to say when you failed. And I encourage people in the audience, if this is something that's hard for you, and it was really hard for me, right? I have a huge perfectionist streak, to actually say the words out loud when you screwed something up, right? Like, wow, once again, I spilled coffee all over myself. Congratulations to me. Or, wow, maybe I could have actually done that report yesterday instead of standing up here in front of the entire team hand-waving about goals and stuff, right? Actually say out loud when you've made a mistake and model this behavior for other people, right? Show them that it's okay to admit when you screwed up. Just do it. And I promise that it gets easier with time, right? It is so hard at the beginning to just say like, wow, I really screwed that up. You can feel your cheeks flush. It's very uncomfortable. But with time and practice, it gets so much easier to just admit your failure. And as you are doing that, as you're owning your mistakes vocally and aloud amongst your peers, you're creating that environment of psychological safety. You're helping them to know that it is safe for them to fail and that this is the pathway for them to be creative, generative, innovative, right? And to do stuff that's much more interesting and much more useful for themselves and for the team. So with that, I welcome questions and also say happy 50th birthday to Star Trek, because Star Trek's cool.
Thank you, Leslie.